Hello and welcome to The Context USA with me, Caitríona Perry in Washington.
And me, Annita McVeigh in London. Ahead this hour, state television in Iran says a draft US deal would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, while America would withdraw military forces from the area. The White House has described the Iranian reports as complete fabrication.
If this deal, this memorandum of understanding is what we see Iranian state TVs saying is true, then Iran is going to gain control over the Strait of Hormuz to some extent.
Iran is very much intent. They want very much to make a deal. So far, they haven't gotten there. We're not satisfied with it, but we will be.
Iran and these people in charge of Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and they will never have a nuclear weapon, and they most certainly will not have one as long as you're president of the United States. On that point, it's very clear.
The talking behind the scenes is still going on, which tells me that ultimately both sides still at the moment are in a place where they would prefer a deal to be done than for the war to escalate.
And joining us tonight on the panel are Leslie Shedd, former communications director and senior advisor for the House Foreign Affairs Committee and president of Rising Communications, and Kelly Hyman, Democratic strategist and attorney. Welcome to you both.
Hello, you're very welcome to The Context USA. Now, later this hour, we're going to be looking at whether soccer fans are being priced out of the World Cup, because New Jersey and New York are demanding answers from FIFA today on how it has approached pricing for its tickets.
First, though, we are starting with the Iran war. On the weekend, it seemed like there was momentum towards some sort of a ceasefire. Today, President Trump claimed Tehran was, in his words, negotiating on fumes.
Now, we're told talks on ending the war are continuing, and today the US president addressed a meeting of his cabinet, and members of the media were recording it and broadcasting it live, as the president likes to do. That was happening at the White House. But the president stressed once again that he does want to make a deal with Iran.
Iran is very much intent. They want very much to make a deal. So far, they haven't gotten there. We're not satisfied with it, but we will be. We will be either that or we'll have to just finish the job. But their Navy is gone, as I've said 1,000 times. Their Navy is gone. Their Air Force is gone. Everything's gone, and they're negotiating on fumes. But we'll see what happens. Maybe we have to go back and finish it. Maybe we don't. Right now, I mean, you can speak to Steve Witkoff and Jared. They're doing a good job, but right now I think it looks like they want to just make a deal. They want to. They have. I don't think they have a choice.
Well, as we mentioned, Iranian state television today reported that Iran had received a preliminary, unofficial draft of a memorandum of understanding with the US on ending their war. It said the framework would see Iran restore commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz to pre-war levels within a month, and in return the US would withdraw military forces from Iran's vicinity and lift the naval blockade.
Now, for its part, the White House says those reports are a complete fabrication, and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned that the US has other options, he said, if those talks don't work out.
The bottom line is Iran's never going to have a nuclear weapon. And if recent events have done anything, is just remind us once again that they are the world's leading sponsor of terrorism. And they can never have a nuclear weapon. Now, the president's preference, Mr. President, your preference is told us repeatedly, is always to negotiate these things and to figure out if you can have agreements. Diplomacy is always the first option. And we continue to work on that through your envoys, Mr. Witkoff and Kushner and others, the vice president, who've been very involved. And if there's an agreement to be made, we want that to be made. I think there's been some progress and some interest, and we'll see over the next few hours and days whether progress could be made. I just want to remind everybody, Mr. President, you know this well, you have other options available to you if that doesn't work.
Well, let's talk about those other options and those talks that may or may not be going on. I'm joined here in studio by Ambassador Puneet Talwar, who served as President Barack Obama's top advisor on Iran and currently leads his own geopolitical advisory firm. Puneet, thanks for joining us here again. Iranian TV says it has seen some sort of draft agreement, which the White House, as we saw there, is describing as a complete fabrication. Is the real situation somewhere in the middle? Are we kind of seeing diplomacy play out in public here?
Yes, I think so. Essentially, I think what's happening here is that we're approaching the final stretch of negotiations. They won't be done until they're done, so this could last some period of time. But what's happening, I think, is that both sides, and particularly the report from Iran that you saw, is an attempt to signal to the core supporters of the regime that basically Iran is not conceding here, that it's coming out on top, essentially. And I think you're seeing a version that here as well from the Trump administration trying to signal to its own supporters that it's on top. I think the other last set of issues involve some substance as well. And I think basically what you're seeing is that as we look to the next phase of the talks, which really get to the core issues of nuclear questions and sanctions relief for Iran, that both sides are trying to retain as much leverage as possible to get the best possible outcome when those talks begin.
Now, you have a lot of experience in negotiating with Iran. From what is in public and reading between the lines, does it look like there is a deal within grasp, that there is something that both countries can agree to and sign up to?
I do. I believe that basically both sides are interested in a deal. That doesn't mean it's available and readily going to happen in the next day or so, but I think we seem to be approaching that final stretch. And I think the options for the United States are not really very good ones at this point. This, in many ways, reflects the least bad option. The other options, really, for a war that was started on a very flawed premise and faulty assumptions of how quickly and easily this could go, I think has turned into something much more difficult. And I think the other options available, really, are to restart this, which would effectively impose a lot more costs on the global economy, or to really ratchet way up and go for a full-on invasion and occupation of Iran, for which there's virtually no support in the United States.
Are they the other options that Marco Rubio was referencing
My
there?
guess is that he was referring to that first one, of something more limited, of restarting the campaign, imposing more costs, destroying critical Iranian infrastructure. But Iran has demonstrated an ability to hit back as well. And I suspect they would go after infrastructure in the Gulf countries, including critical energy infrastructure. And the costs for the global economy in that case would just basically accelerate and exacerbate.
Let's just talk about timeline for a moment, because again, Marco Rubio there said, it could be a few days before we see something. Depending on what reporting you look at, the next phase could be 30 to 60 days. But that all seems very short compared to what we're used to seeing for negotiations with Iran. I mean, back when you were involved at JCPOA days, it was heading for 2 years.
Yes, and prior to that, actually, we did reach an agreement called the Joint Plan of Action, and the negotiations for that, following the election of President Rouhani, moved relatively quickly. We were able to do that and wrap it up in a few months' time. So the Iranians, when they want to do something, can do it more quickly, but you need a lot of expertise at the table, you need a degree of focus, and ideally you should have direct talks. One of the reasons I suspect that this has dragged on a little bit is that the talks are going on through third parties who always will have their own interests. Things will always get lost in translation. And so it's always better to do this directly. So I would hope that as part of this first phase of the deal, that it will be followed by direct engagement between the United States and Iran. I think that will make things go faster. But I suspect we're going to see hiccups. We're going to see a lot of positioning, a lot of attempts to gain leverage by either side to basically get the best possible outcome for their position.
And just when you mentioned third parties there, I mean, going alongside of this, we have Israel and Hezbollah. I mean, a ceasefire in really only name at this point between Israel and Lebanon. To what extent does that need to be resolved alongside what we're looking at with Iran and the US, or does that come after?
I think basically it's going to be part of the deal. I think Iran is insisting on it. And in fact, we saw initially when that ceasefire first began in Lebanon and since has started to break down gradually, that in fact it seemed to have been President Trump who really imposed that condition on Israel. And I suspect that'll happen this time around as well. Iran wants to demonstrate to Hezbollah, which is sort of the crown jewel in its regional proxy network, that it still has the ability to stand up for it and to deliver results, even after absorbing these pretty enormous military blows from the most powerful military in the world and the most powerful military in the region.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens next. Puneet Talwar, thank you very much for joining us with your insights and your analysis there.
Pleasure to be with you, Katrina.
We'll be discussing the latest on the US-Iran war with our panel in just a few minutes. But first, we want to bring you some breaking news coming to us in the last few minutes. And this relates to the final in a series of prosecutions related to the death of the Friends star Matthew Perry, the sentencing of the man who was his live-in personal assistant. Let's go to our correspondent Shaima Khalil, who was in court in LA. And Shaima, bring us up to date with what's been happening in the last few moments.
Well, Kenneth Iwamasa has been sentenced to 41 months in prison. That's about 3 years and 5 months. 2 years of supervised release after that, and $10,000 in fines. The atmosphere was charged inside the courtroom, even though it was quiet, deadly quiet sometimes. You could feel the tension. I was sat very closely to Matthew Perry's family, his stepfather, his mother, and 2 sisters, and the trustee of the Matthew Perry Foundation, who appeared quite emotional at times. When she gave out her sentencing, the judge based it on 2 things. One, Mr. Iwamasa's proximity to Matthew Perry. He was his live-in assistant. He described himself as his friend. She said your knowledge of Mr. Perry's struggle with addiction, but also the concealment of evidence in the beginning. She said that you were privy to his struggle of addiction. You knew he was not supposed to use the amount of ketamine that you administered. You saw the effect of that on him when he froze and he was unresponsive, and yet you continued to procure ketamine, and you did so without being a licensed physician. Remember that Mr. Iwamasa has pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine causing death, but he also admitted repeatedly injecting Matthew Perry with ketamine without medical training, including performing multiple injections the day Matthew Perry died in October 2023. We heard from the prosecution, we heard from Matthew Perry's family, and their arguments really was around what Mr. Iwamasa was doing in that lead up to the day of his death. They argued that he was trying to maintain control over Matthew Perry's, the control over access to Matthew Perry's house, but also over his medical supervision over him, that he acquired ketamine, that he was in touch with these 2 doctors and 1 person who procured the ketamine from what we know now as the ketamine queen, and he administered that on Matthew Perry. What the defense was saying was that Kenneth Iwamasa was doing what he was told to do, that this was an unequal relationship between a boss and his employees, something that Matthew's family refuted, especially his stepfather, Keith Morrison. When he spoke, he said that the family trusted Mr. Iwamasa. They considered him to be a family member, and all they wanted from him, he said from the beginning, was to inform them when Matthew was slipping so that they could intervene, so that they could get involved. Not only did he not do that, but he continued to procure ketamine and inject him with it until that one final one when he died.
Shaima, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on that. Shaima Khalil in Los Angeles.
Okay, well, let's go back to what we were talking about just before that breaking news, which is the ongoing situation in Iran and those efforts to try and agree some sort of at least interim ceasefire deal. We'll bring back in our panel here, former communications director and senior advisor for the House Foreign Affairs Committee and president of Rising Communications, Leslie Shedd, is with us, as is Democratic strategist and attorney Kelly Hyman. Leslie, to you first. It was interesting watching the cabinet meeting earlier, and President Trump again doubling down on his need to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, saying that he's not as focused on what that means for Americans at this point in terms of the economy and rising gas prices, but that nuclear point is his sole focus. What did you make of his comments?
I mean, the commander-in-chief's job is to prioritize U.S. national security. That's what we want. What he's saying is, I'm not playing politics with U.S. national security. I'm going to do what I think is best in my role as commander-in-chief. I applaud him for that, and I think that that is the right approach to this.
Kelly, what's your view?
why did we get into this war to begin with? How many more Americans need to die over this war? We've lost over 14 American soldiers. We've had over 100 people being injured. We look at the gas prices that are affecting the American people. And what has been reported is some kind of alleged deal which has nothing to do with the nuclear issue. And we have such a tremendous price that the American people and the global economy is faced because of this.
Leslie, obviously both sides talking tough. That's what happens in war. But from the US perspective, do you think that President Trump wants a deal more than he wants further fighting, albeit, as you pointed out, he's saying his priority is the nuclear issue, not even necessarily what's happening, the impacts on the economy domestically?
Well, first, I want to go back and make it clear. This MOU that we're talking about, this supposed deal, this is coming from Iranian-controlled media. So I would not believe anything that Iranian-controlled media has to say. The White House and administration officials have vehemently denied that this is the deal that has been offered to Iran. So I don't think that we should give any more oxygen or credence to...
But presumably there is some form of words there, Leslie, because, just last weekend, President Trump was talking about, and indeed Marco Rubio was talking about, the notion of them getting a bit closer to an agreement. So there must be some substance around that.
Of course, I'm certain that negotiations are ongoing. But again, anything that comes from Iranian media is propaganda from a brutalist, murderous regime in Iran. So I don't think that we should give that credit. We need to see what is going to be in this final deal. There's a lot of talk right now. You don't know what will end up in one of these deals. As a person who's dealt in foreign policy for quite some time, I can tell you that the painstaking, step-by-step process of getting everything in final deals, things change repeatedly. One word difference can make a huge difference in what a final deal says. So we just need to see whatever the final deal we get. And going back to your question, President Trump is a peacemaker. He wants peace. He has repeatedly tried to advocate for peace. And I think that he is prioritizing that. But again, not above what is best for U.S. national security.
Kelly, listening again to the president earlier, and, he had said that this operation initially would be a few days, then a few weeks, we're into months now, but he was putting it in the context of the years spent in Vietnam and Afghanistan and so on. Do you think, is he signalling that perhaps a short exit here is not as likely as perhaps he once thought?
I hope not, and I hope not for multiple reasons. I hope not because of the detrimental effect that it's had on the American economy, the detrimental effect that it's had on people who are getting gas, who want fertilization, how it's affecting the costs at the market, and how it's really harming the American people, that this is not something that goes on for so many years.
OK, Kelly and Leslie, stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment talking about more prices, this time in terms of tickets. So do stay with us. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Welcome back to The Context USA on BBC News. Well, whether you call it football here or soccer, where you are, Caitríona, we are less than a month out from the start of the FIFA World Cup, one of the biggest competitions in world sport.
But before all the fun and nerves, there is some frustration from fans at this point about the cost of trying to be part of this major sporting moment. All of the logistics aside, the tournament is split across cities in 3 countries, Canada, Mexico and here in the US. FIFA, the world football's governing body, has faced widespread and vocal criticism for months now over the high price of tickets and that some fans had been misled about what seats they'd actually paid for.
Well, today, the states of New Jersey and New York have teamed up in the push for answers. One of New Jersey's stadiums will host 8 matches, including the final. The Attorney Generals of both states jointly subpoenaed FIFA, calling for information about its ticketing practices. Our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfik, has more.
There have been complaints from fans for several weeks now saying that they have felt scammed by FIFA, not just because of what they see as astronomically high prices, but because many fans have reported that initially when FIFA put out a guidance on the categories for stadiums and fans purchased those tickets, that they later found out that their seats weren't exactly where they thought they were, and they ended up being assigned seats much further back from the field or even behind goals with obstructed views. And some fans and news outlets have even accused FIFA of changing the ticket categories after sales had already begun. And so this caught the attention of the attorneys general in both New York and New Jersey, because at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, they are hosting 8 World Cup matches, including England's last group match and the World Cup final. And they want to speak to FIFA directly now to see if there was artificially inflated pricing and if fans were misled. In fact, New Jersey's Attorney General Jennifer Davenport has accused FIFA of creating a ticketing lottery and release that essentially amounted to a gauntlet of confusion, fake scarcity, and impossibly high prices. So now this is something that officials want to probe to see if consumers were manipulated.
Neda Tawfik. Well, let's return to our panel, Leslie Shedd and Kelly Hyman. Kelly, I was checking out some ticket prices earlier, and you could get a ticket for the World Cup final in 2022 for $1,600. Tickets for the final this time round are on the market for tens of thousands of dollars. Now, FIFA has talked about following the market, watching the market in which the games are being played, and about the dynamic pricing that is commonplace in the US. What do you make of this controversy?
You should pay for what you get. Now, there's allegations that people are paying money for tickets, a lot of money, and not getting the seats that they're supposed to get. So I think it's going to be interesting to find out exactly what happens from a legal perspective to see if that, in fact, is the case, because allegedly there's a lot of complaints about this and people are paying for something and it's very, very expensive. So we're going to have to wait and see how this turns out. But hopefully that the people that spent all this money will get the seats actually that they paid for, and there'll be some kind of relief for them.
Leslie, is this one of those issues where there is bipartisan support? Nobody wants to pay astronomical prices for tickets. Even the president has admitted he wouldn't pay some of the prices that are being charged here. But is there anything that can be done at a congressional level or a legislative level in this country?
Well, you know, first of all, I think you're seeing prices rise dramatically just across the board, whether it's sporting events or concerts. I went to go see Florence and the Machine. I love Florence. I went to go see her for my birthday this year here in D.C. at Capital One Arena, and we paid about $500 per ticket. And back in 2022, when she was here, for almost the exact same seats, I paid $300. So that's a 67% increase in the price of tickets just over 4 years. So you're just kind of seeing this across the board. I think my professor at Clemson, my economics professor at Clemson would tell you, you know, demand ends up setting prices. And it seems like that's what we're seeing here. But if deceptive practices are happening, if they are violating the law, if they are misleading any of their consumers, then I think that people should be held accountable. So let's see what this investigation uncovers. Let's see if there is something, you know, bad happening, and make sure that those bad actors are held accountable.
There's an issue, though, isn't there, Kelly, when the regular person can't afford to go to an event or go to a football match. And that is when, when people are priced out of big events like this, exciting moments like this, that becomes then a more fundamental problem, doesn't it, Kelly?
From an economic standpoint, absolutely. But I do believe that accountability is key in this matter, and that if this is in fact happening, that they need to be accountable, because people should be able to go to these events. People should not be priced out of these events, or people should not pay for something and not get something. I think that's going to be a really important issue in this matter.
OK, well, a quick thought from you as well, Leslie, on that. We've only got about 40 seconds left, so briefly, if you would.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that every person should be able to experience, games like this. And I think it's frustrating when you see prices that are so high that it prices out, a large chunk of the population.
OK, well, Leslie and Kelly, we will be back with you very shortly after this short break. So do stay with us here on The Context USA for much more conversation with our panel. When he was re-elected to office, Donald Trump promised to be tougher on immigration. That approach was always going to be met with opposition, and we're seeing that play out in New Jersey this week.
Indeed, demonstrations have been taking place for several days now outside Delaney Hall, an immigration detention facility in Newark that is run by a private contractor. These sorts of videos have been coming in across the week. Clashes, at times heated, between protesters and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE as they're commonly known, agents from that federal agency.
At the centre of these demonstrations are allegations of inhumane conditions inside Delaney Hall. Advocates say it's so bad, some detainees have begun a hunger strike.
The Department of Homeland Security, though, has denied those claims. Officials have labelled the protesters as rioters and say they're obstructing law enforcement operations.
It shows this radical left Democrats' priorities when they decide to go out and protest a detention center where we're housing rapists, child predators, murderers, drug dealers, and they choose Memorial Day of all the time to go protest something that they say that that it's because they're on a hunger strike, when there was only a handful of individuals that was refusing to eat because they want their ethnic group or their ethnic right food. Well, they go back to their country and get whatever food they want. The fact is, we're giving them the calories they want. This isn't Holiday Inn. We're giving them sanitation.
So that's the new Secretary for Homeland Security, Mark Wayne Mullen, speaking at the Cabinet meeting a little earlier. But Democratic lawmakers who have toured the facility, like Congressman Rob Menendez, argue that the Trump administration is using this as a distraction.
In the last 24 hours, they've tried to shift the focus into what is happening out here because they want to shift the attention away from all the conditions inside that myself, Governor Sherrill, Senator Kim, and so many of my House colleagues have been highlighting for the last several months. They don't want the conversation to be, why is our federal government spending billions of dollars holding people with no criminal records here at Delaney Hall and private detention centers across the country?
Well, joining us now from Newark, New Jersey is Sean Sullivan, a lead reporter on this story for NJ.com. Sean, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. What more can you tell us about Delaney Hall, and what are you hearing about conditions inside it for yourself?
Sure. Yeah, Delaney Hall is a privately run immigration detention facility. It's basically a private jail. It has a contract with ICE that it obtained, I think, up to 1,000 beds, but we hear somewhere in the hundreds for inmates. And on Friday, inmates started staging a hunger strike, complaining about conditions there, everything from bugs in their food to lack of medical care, being put in solitary confinement, various things. It's worth noting that from the get-go, the DHS has been of the position that this hunger strike isn't happening. But we've gotten letters and testimony from folks on the inside saying that this is happening. And so we had a holiday weekend here, and over the holiday weekend, things got very tense and kind of came to a head on Monday. And that's when you started seeing the protests outside the facility. You started seeing New Jersey lawmakers trying to get into the facility. New Jersey's governor was turned away. but federal lawmakers have been able to get in and are sort of confirming some of these accounts. It's gotten very tense. I was there this afternoon talking to folks, and things are a little bit quieter now. But I did notice that it looks like the protesters are putting up infrastructure. You know, there are medical tents. It seems like they're setting up for the long haul. Who knows how long this will be, but it seems like they are setting up to dig in.
And as far as you can determine, Sean, is this hunger strike continuing?
Yes, I mean, it's very difficult to get firsthand accounts from the inside, both because these inmates are concerned about retaliation and just because of the security of the facility. But the inmates, the detainees themselves have published a number of letters saying that these conditions are very real. How many inmates are taking part in this? It can be a matter of dispute, but I don't think that there's any question that there's some sort of demonstration going on inside Delaney Hall in addition to the protests that are going on outside.
Now, we played a clip of Markwayne Mullin, the new Homeland Security Secretary. He has made comments recently saying that the Trump administration is drawing up plans to stop processing international travelers and cargo at major airports in what he called sanctuary cities, which he said had declined to cooperate with immigration enforcement. Obviously, Newark has a large airport. What more are you hearing about that and any impact that might have?
Yeah, we heard that today. Certainly the state lawmakers have concerns about that. It remains to be seen how serious that plan is. I mean, we are talking about Newark International Airport is a major hub here. LaGuardia in New York, I guess, would also qualify as a sanctuary city. And so, there are a lot of cities in America that have airports that I think would qualify for this. And as you know, we have the World Cup coming, which seems important to Donald Trump. So I don't know per se how serious they are about this, but it seems like they are putting anything on the table in terms of creative policies to try to tamp down on what they are painting as sort of publicity stunt by the Democrats, but what immigration advocates are saying is a very legitimate protest movement coming from the inside.
And you mentioned that the protesters are setting up some infrastructure, which you saw when you were there earlier today. How would you describe the atmosphere between the protesters and the immigration agents on the other hand?
Things are a little bit tense. I mean, I was there in the afternoon, and so these things after a couple of days tend to take on a little bit more of a festival atmosphere. I mean, obviously the tension is there, but you have folks kind of singing and chanting. The protesters have really settled in on setting up at the gates of this facility and either monitoring vehicles coming in and out, or in some cases actually trying to block vehicles from coming in and out. And so that's what you're seeing, kind of the confrontations. I believe Tuesday night, 2 people were arrested. The DHS claimed that they were spraying officers with a chemical irritant. Some of the protesters are saying that at least one of these people was a medic that was kind of snatched off the street. And so even with these arrests, you're getting conflicting accounts as to what's going on. But I would say it's sort of a tense standoff atmosphere as it stands right now.
OK, Sean, thank you very much. Sean Sullivan from NJ.com. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Now, when it comes to immigration policy, these kinds of ongoing tensions between the Trump administration and some Democratic-led cities and parts of the US extend way beyond Newark, of course. And as we've just heard also this week, the Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security, Markwayne Mullin, said plans were being drawn up to stop processing international travellers and cargo at major US ports in what are known as sanctuary cities.
And you will probably have heard this term before. It refers to those cities which have declined to cooperate with the president's immigration crackdown. Some of these cities are major transport hubs, as our guest was mentioning. These measures could effectively halt international travel and business, a chaotic prospect at any time, but potentially even more so with millions of tourists expected in the US for next month's FIFA World Cup.
Well, let's get the thoughts of our panel on all of this. Leslie Shedd, former Communications Director and Senior Advisor for the House Foreign Affairs Committee, now President of Rising Communications, and Kelly Hyman, Democratic strategist and attorney. Leslie, to you first, on this threat from Secretary Mullin to essentially stop all of this immigration processing at airports and sanctuary cities, would that ultimately not just hurt the entirety of the US, not just those cities?
Sanctuary city policies make those cities and those states less safe. Full stop on that. They make them less safe. When you have federal officials that are able to cooperate with state officials, then you have an easy, successful transfer of illegal criminal aliens out of the state and out of the country. So the fact that you have state governors and mayors and others who are just refusing to participate in any immigration enforcement, and not only that, but actively trying to hamper the federal government from doing its job, it causes problems.
They would argue that Leslie, they would argue that it doesn't make it less safe, and also they are entitled to not have to impose some of those laws in their states, not to obstruct, but they don't have to impose them.
I'm sure that they would argue that, but if you go and look, there were successful immigration operations that were taking place across the country in places that do not have sanctuary city policies in place. They were able to go in, work closely, especially dealing with the corrections facilities, pulling people directly out of jails, easy transfers, and deporting them. The problems that you saw were every time it was in sanctuary city policy areas, whether that was in the state or the cities, that were refusing to cooperate and being obstructionists. And that is what caused all of these problems. So sanctuary city proponents can say what they want to say about this, but at the end of the day, it makes cities and states less safe.
Kelly, picking up on what Leslie is saying, based on what you know about what we're seeing here in Newark, do you think that the protesters are being obstructive, or are they exercising their right to protest?
There's two different points of view when it comes to this, but when we look at it from a legal perspective in our wonderful country that we live in, that people have a right to peacefully protest. Now, if they're crossing the line or if they're obstructing something or harming someone, then there can be an issue for that, where there can be justification for them being arrested. But that's what's great. We can agree to disagree in our country, and people can disagree about different issues. And going back to the point about the different sanctuary cities, under our Constitution, we have state rights. And what that means is states have their own rights, and states are allowed to have their own rights that are different, potentially, from the federal government.
And Leslie, in the case of Delaney Hall here, if 300 people are on hunger strike, doesn't that suggest that there are problems in the detention of these individuals?
I haven't seen the 300 number. What I saw was that of the 1,000 beds, that only approximately 200 of those are currently occupied, and that if there is some kind of a hunger strike happening, it is among a very small portion. Look, people, as Kelly just said, they have the right, if they want to protest in different ways. If they want to choose to go on a hunger strike, that's something that they can choose to go on to. I will say from the, what I have seen, that while there might be some problems every so often with food, heck, even I have food issues every so often when I go to even a nice restaurant. But they have tablets in there. The reason why the reporter that you just had on and others that are reporting on this
just on that point, I mean, you're choosing to go to that restaurant. These individuals have no control over the food.
These individuals broke the law in the United States of America, and they have been detained for that. I mean, did they expect a 5-star resort?
These people are not all convicted criminals. Yes, you can say they've broken the law and that they're here perhaps without the correct paperwork, right, or they're awaiting processing or whatever. But the policies from the Trump administration, as they've been laid out, is about rounding up and expelling from the country those who are convicted criminals, who are dangerous. The president refers to them as murderers and rapists and so on. The statistics would show that the vast majority of those who are detained don't fit into that category.
Do you want to know how it is that the reporter that you were just speaking with and other reporters are getting information out of the facility in there? Because they all have tablets. They're able to communicate, watch TV shows, send emails. That doesn't really sound like they're being tortured to me. I I feel bad. Like, listen, let me tell you this. Like, it's heartbreaking when you see people who have been in this country illegally for a long time that are deported. But unfortunately, as a lawyer, the law is the law. If you don't like the law, then we need to change it. Otherwise, you have to enforce the law, or else you are teaching people here that the law is malleable and that they don't have to obey the laws that they disagree with. And that's just not the way that the system works here.
Kelly, very briefly, isn't one of the issues here is that this has become so politicized for both sides politically, you know, to beat one another with, and that ultimately is hugely unhelpful for, you know, civil dialogue?
It's important to have civil dialogue, but it's important to remember that there are certain facts, like we can all agree in the court of law that you are innocent until you are proven guilty. If there is nothing to hide at this detention center, then why isn't the governor allowed in to go see what's going on? What exactly is happening there? I think that's an important issue to think about.
Do you think that's a political decision, though, rather than a decision about attempting to hide anything that's going on inside?
It shouldn't be a political issue. I mean, it should be a humanitarian issue. If in fact the allegations are true of what these people are going through and the mold and the issues that they have certain rights, no matter what you feel about them or what they do. People have rights. Human beings have rights. And so I think it shouldn't be a legal issue. It shouldn't be a political issue. It should be a humanitarian issue.
Leslie, what about at that point that the governor was denied entry, that Senator Andy Kim was denied entry until he actually called the secretary and asked him to intervene?
Federal officials were allowed in, from what I understand. Democrats
but
tend
the
to do
governor
this.
said
Look,
she was not allowed in.
she's
And the
not a
senator
federal
said
official.
the senator said
So-
he wasn't either until he called the secretary.
Yeah, he had to call and request approval to come in. And he's a federal official. Other federal officials were allowed in. Look, I'm not trying to single out Democrats here and say they're the only ones that do this, but Democrats are staging these publicity stunts outside of these facilities. They're bringing camera crews and they're doing it to make a scene rather than to actually get in and conduct real oversight. When you are conducting oversight as a United States member of Congress, you do a bunch of steps ahead of time. You reach out to the secretary who is in charge of the facility. You request documents. You ask for access. They set up dates and times for you to come. You don't show up with CNN or whoever your local camera crew is and demand to be let in. That is not going to be a successful approach. It's a publicity
Kelly,
stunt.
do you think that what's happening with the protesters is a publicity stunt? That's what Leslie has just called it?
Well, that's what I said about the members of Congress showing up to do that without getting pre-approval.
OK, well, perhaps they might argue that that was the only way they felt they could get the attention they needed to try to get in. I can't speak for them, but I'm just trying to surmise what might have been happening around that. But, you know, Kelly, do you think that was a publicity stunt?
I don't believe it was a publicity stunt. I mean, people are there and they have their right to protest and stand there and advocate for their position. That is really great about our country as well. But if it should be not a political issue, it should be a humanitarian issue. And so let's have all Republicans go in and Democrats go in together and see it together. So this is not a political issue, but this is about what exactly is going on there.
OK, well, we have to move on from that discussion point, but we will be back very soon. So do stay with us around the world and across the UK. This is The Context USA on BBC News.
I knew signing up to this was going to absolutely ruin my credibility.
Inside world sport's most controversial training camp. Preparations for the enhanced games, where drugs banned elsewhere in sport are part of the process.
I want to be able to run the fastest time as possible and push my body to the limit.
I'm really excited. I'm quite open about taking things.
I think it's extremely irresponsible. Some of the effects are irreversible.
Sport has long waged an arduous and ongoing battle against drugs cheats in a bid to preserve the integrity of competition and ensure that those watching can believe what they see.
It'll be the most dramatic story out of these Olympics or perhaps any others. Ben Johnson of Canada has been caught taking drugs.
But at the enhanced games, the usual rules don't apply.
it worked really well.
It sends a dangerous message about performance-enhancing drugs.
The message is clear. Do not try this at home.
Watch on BBC iPlayer.
You're watching The Context USA on BBC News. Now, we were talking earlier about the cabinet meeting at the White House today. President Trump began that meeting by talking about the great electoral victories he and his team had enjoyed last night. He said, indeed, right through the last couple of months, because Trump-backed candidates have been trouncing their fellow Republicans in many primary elections. Primary elections, of course, are kind of the preliminary elections to select the candidates that will then face off against someone from the other party, usually for the congressional seats in the autumn.
Well, the big one in Texas last night when the state attorney general Ken Paxton, backed by the president, beat a 4-term sitting senator, John Cornyn, to secure the Senate candidacy. We were talking about that on the programme last night. So that was the result. He'll now face Democratic state lawmaker James Tallarico for the Senate seat, with Democrats getting very excited about the possibility of a landmark victory in the Lone Star State.
Here's what President Trump said about the night a little earlier.
Last night was incredible. Not only Texas, but so many other places. And the numbers were fantastic. And they've really been that way for a year. If you look, it's hundreds of people won. And almost nobody didn't win. So, but last night was very, very powerful.
There were shocks on the Democratic side in Texas too. Longtime Congressman Al Green lost out to Congressman Christian Menifee, a runoff election that saw a lot of cash dropped in the district in favour of the younger Menifee. Green also likely lost out because of the controversial redistricting efforts in the state that carved up his district.
The redrawing of maps also likely contributed to sitting Congresswoman Julie Johnson losing out to former Congressman Colin Allred, who had actually held the seat before Julie Johnson.
OK, well, let's return to our panel, Leslie Shedd and Kelly Hyman. Kelly, just give us your thoughts on how all of that shook down in Texas and the role of redistricting in all of this.
It definitely played a key role in the election, as you pointed out about the two Democrats going against each other. But what it showed is Al Green and the other person that there is a movement in the Democratic Party to have new ideas, new vision, young people as well. So I think that that's really, really important. Now, if we look about Ken Paxton winning, now we have to think how exactly is that going to turn out in November. The Republicans are going to spend a lot of money on that race, which money they could be using for Georgia, using for North Carolina as well. But that's why the Democrats are very excited about this race and potentially turning Texas from red to blue.
Leslie, I want to bring you in on this, and just to point out that Ken Paxton is a client of yours in his capacity for Attorney General, but perhaps you can give us some inside knowledge on how he fancies his chances against James Tallarico come November.
Yes, listen, I've been working in Texas politics for years and years and years, and Texas is red. It's red through and through. Like I love it when media and pollsters convince Democrats that Texas is up for grabs because it forces them to spend tens of millions of dollars in a state that they're just never going to win. Ken Paxton will be the next United States Senator from Texas. And history's on my side. Like even in cycles in recent times when Republicans didn't do so well in 2018 and in 2020, Republicans won statewide in Texas. So I think that we'll be fine. I think that Ken Paxton will win. And I think he's going to be a great United States Senator.
You're very confident that he's going to win, but obviously both sides are going to throw everything at this. And to the point, Leslie, that Kelly was talking about, the amount of money that's being spent on particular races, do you think that might be problematic for the party overall? I mean, and that could apply, those questions could apply to both parties.
I mean, I think it'll be problematic for Democrats because they'll just be setting money on fire because Texas is a red state. That's good for Republicans because it draws money out of other races that they could potentially win. But like I said, again, Texas is a Republican state through and through. And I think that Ken Paxton is going to win, and I would even say probably win by 3, 4, maybe even 5 points, which is a nice big victory in Texas.
Kelly, you're smiling when Leslie suggests that the Democrats might be as well burning money in this contest. Your thoughts?
Ken Paxton has more baggage than they sell at a Walmart luggage department. I mean, he comes in as being indicted, impeached, and so they have to deal with that as well. It is going to be a nasty campaign. But I go back to the point is that, as she pointed out, that if in fact Texas was a red state, they're spending so much money, which could go to other races. So no matter what, from a Democratic perspective, if we don't win, it's still a win-win for us.
And Leslie, just on that broader point of the success that President Trump has had in terms of anointing and picking candidates in various races in the last few months, is this him setting himself up to basically anoint the 2028 candidate that he's had such good success to this point?
I mean, I'm certain that he will continue to play a powerful role in picking, in some of the next leaders in the Republican Party. It'll be interesting, really, to see what he does in 2028. So far, he's really seemed to want to stay out of it. He wants to kind of see what cream rises to the top, right? I think he's definitely got a favorite in Vice President Vance. I think that Vance has a lot of support from kind of the Republican machinery. All of the campaign consultants and donors, I think, are kind of lining up, getting ready to be behind Vice President Vance. But we'll see what ends up happening in the long run. If I was a betting person, though, my money's on Vance.
OK, well, of course, the president has teased a little Rubio-Vance face-off there from time to time, hasn't he? But we've plenty of time to talk.
Oh, sorry.
We're running out of time. Save your point, Leslie, for the next programme, because we'll definitely be talking about this in the months ahead.
I was just going to say, when he does that, I think it's him really trying to say what a great team the two of them make.
Okay. I'm sure they'd agree with him on that as well. Leslie Shedd and Kelly Hyman, thanks to you both for joining us here on The Context USA on BBC News.